Hello, everybody. So, today at the IMAX Credit Repair podcast, we have a dear friend of mine and an associate as well, Laz Vento. He's got a very amazing story. I met Laz maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And at that time, he was in the seminal stages of starting a business. And today, he owns at least two of them or three of them that I know of for Airbnb, Turo, and he actually helps people set up businesses. But what we're going to talk about today is how he ended up making $1 million a month on Airbnb. And I remember he did it in very, very quick time as such. So Laz, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing, bro?
Hey, how's it going? We're here. We made it. Wanted to talk to you about the Airbnb business in this episode. We're going to talk about how I started the business, how I got started. How I started with very little money too. When I originally started the company, I believe I only started with like $1,500, which was
wow. Yeah, I remember that, man. Like when you were starting up. What year was that?
I started. What year was it? It was at 2016.
Okay.
So that's when. That's why when you go to my Instagram, it's Brickle Cigars. I was running a cigar company that I had started. I worked remember we talked that you worked in the car business at some point. I worked at a BMW store for many, many years, and I got kind of sick of it, and I wanted to do something else. I had some money saved up, and I opened up a cigar company, and that didn't go well at all. I ended up losing all my money after 2 years, and it just didn't work out. But what did actually work out was I met somebody there, one of my customers who was a little younger than me, but he had a lot of world travel. He had gone to Vietnam and a bunch of other places, and he had been using this thing called Airbnb that I had never heard of. And he was telling me about his travels, and he was seeing my struggles at the store. And he basically was moving from Indiana, and he needed a house. He realized that I had my real estate license, so he said, "Well, why don't you help me get this house? That way you make a commission or whatever." And I'm like, "Cool." and we were looking at houses, and I didn't really know what his whole plan was, but he wanted like a 2-family house. And once we started talking about it, he was telling me, "Well, what I want to do is I want to rent it out." And I thought he was talking about renting one, like traditionally, like to a long-term tenant, and living in the other side.
And again, what city was this?
Well, and this was in Miami, and this was in.
Got it.
We ended up finding a house.
This is the first house that started the $1 million a month business.
Yeah. So it was a house in Little Haiti. My buddy Fred, he had a budget. It was like $250,000, $300,000, which today you wouldn't be able to do this in that neighborhood.
Gotcha.
Especially not a 2-family.
Yeah.
But back then, in 2015, 2016, there was stuff to be had in the 300s and low 400s. And what we ended up doing, because we were looking all over, and finally we found this house. It was actually off market. I was just driving the neighborhoods for him, just kind of seeing. And this house had an old for sale sign that was kind of dropped off to its side or something. I called the number, and it wasn't on the MLS anymore, but the guy told me, yeah, it could be. The guy still wants to sell, and the place was a dump.
So take me through this, right? Okay, you go buy this place. You've not had any experience renting out. What happens then, right? Because what I want to do basically is kind of like let people know exactly what their steps are going to be, and I want them to walk those steps with you.
Okay. This first deal was what Fred wanted to do, which actually lit the light bulb on me, because when we bought this house, it was bad tenants. We had to pay people I think it was $5,000 to move out. And I'm like, Fred, why are you buying this thing? You're going to have the same experience. And then that's when he told me, hey, yeah, no, I'm not going to rent to people. I've done this Airbnb thing in Europe and a whole bunch of places, because it was new. There was no Airbnbs in Miami.
Gotcha.
At that point. So he told me, I'm going to make it nice and I'm going to rent it. And then it kind of struck a little interest in me. So I did some basic web research, and I found that there was already one mega operator in New York that at that point he was already making $1 million. And I decided, well, it was easy to find Fred a house, and my credit at that point was pretty jacked up. So I knew I couldn't buy a house like and I didn't have cash to buy it like he did. But I said, I wonder if I could rent a house since there's such a big supply of these houses like this, which are 2-family residents, and there were a lot of them. So I found a subject that worked perfectly. The rent, I think the rent rate was back then. It was a big place. It was 20. I want to say it was 2,300 or 2,600.
So just so that I got this right, so you go ahead and rent a house for $2,600, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many bedrooms is this?
In this particular deal, my only goal, this was my first goal, was getting to zero. Like getting to zero meaning zero rent. Because Fred, if he had a mortgage, he would have been able to leave for free. So I said, so if we do this and if it works, the rent was $2,300. It was one main house with a guest house in the back.
Got it.
So the main house had like three or four bedrooms, and then had a decent sized guest house. So I went out, I furnished it cheaply, and Airbnb back then took the pictures for you because that was kind of their model. So every unit looked cool on the website. They always had a free photographer.
Got it. I love the fact that I have to say this, that I love the fact that, you kind of like, just like, hey, I'm just doing this. This is 1 bedroom. I just want to get to rent zero. Let's just say somebody who's listening right now, right? What would you tell them as to what's the first place they need to start?
Something like that is the best way to start. And like that same model, I'm still doing it today in my house. So if you have a place that has a side door and you could kind of operate it so you could have a separate unit that brings you income without actually having to acquire more real estate. Now you're bringing in revenue.
Got it. So just to reiterate, right, because a lot of people may not understand the complication of what Vento is saying, but what I'm hearing you say is that you rent a place where you're going to be living yourself, but it may have an ADU or like an attached unit or something that could be cordoned off. So this way you're going ahead and renting that place and also going ahead and, got your expenses covered. Exactly. And as long as you come to rent zero, right?
As long as you don't get to rent zero,
that's your first property.
That's the first step. Luckily back then there was a lot of them, and I ended up, as soon as I put that property up, I got my first reservation, I think 15 minutes later. Beautiful. And it was a guy, I remember his name because it was my first booking. His name was Jose, and he was there for like 35 days. And his reservation was like 400 above the rent. So I'm like, holy, like now in my mind at that point, I was still trying to keep my cigar business alive. So I said, well, now I don't have to worry about rent. So I could indefinitely run my cigar shop without worrying about rent. But that morphed pretty quickly because the house right next door to mine became available.
So what I really find valuable, right, and something that I didn't even think of, because I'm thinking, I'm going to go buy an Airbnb property and so forth and rent it out. And you're, and that's what people should do. And you're basically here saying, no, you don't even need to buy anything. Just go rent a duplex or something that has an adjoining property or a property that has part of the unit cordoned off, right? And you start there. So that's beautiful because anybody could do that.
Anybody could do that.
Right. And if you rent, you could do that. You get
to zero. That
beautiful.
And so many of my friends and neighbors saw that I did that. And before I had a course, before I did anything, a lot of these people, I remember this Puerto Rican guy who lived next to us. One day he walked because now I'm not doing anything but just being there and starting to acquire more properties. And one day he comes up and says, "Hey, what is it that you do here?" And I'm like, all right. And I kind of explained, and I could see that the light bulb went off because I explained to him, I showed him the setup, and he's like, and I'll come back, I'll be back to you in about 5 months. This guy actually went out, he took the initiative.
Oh,
he saw what I did. He bought a property. The guy had construction experience. And he sectioned out a part of this house.
That's epic.
And all of a sudden he came and he didn't know the next step, but he believed that I believed. So because he saw the results, and he didn't even know how to list the property on Airbnb, which was funny. And one day he shows up at my house and says, "All right, I'm ready. What's the next step?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" Remember, I forgot I talked to him. And he's like, "Remember the house and all that? You want to come and help me?" I'm like, "Sure, let's go. I did what you did. What do I do next? How do I make money?" So I grabbed his phone and I said, "All right, let's take a look." He did a really nice job with the place, decorated it nice. and right there with his phone, took some pictures, and it went live, and it got rented that like within minutes. And
amazing.
back then it was no saturation in the market. So if you had like one property, you're probably one of 4 properties in the whole in the whole like radius. So,
dude,
it was funny, and that guy actually he didn't want to scale really big.
Yeah,
but he did end up buying another house, and him and his wife. That's it. They don't work. They didn't work anymore after that. They just for free, and they have this
just a conversation with Laz may get you retired, and owning a crap load of property. That's what happened.
That was a cool experience. Wow. That was just a random guy. He had his eyes open because his mom lived right next door to me. Yeah. And he wanted to know, like, what the hell are you doing? Are you selling drugs? What are you doing that you're home all day? Because this guy worked construction. He was leaving at 6 a.m. Yeah. And he's like, you guys are just hanging out here all day.
So tell me this. So imagine this, right? Somebody's got their first property. They're renting out the ADU or the adjoined unit, or somebody rented a duplex for themselves and rented the other portion out, right? Mm-hmm. What happens next, right? What do we do next? And keep in mind that some cities are not allowing long-term rentals now.
Well, they're not allowing short-term rentals.
Short-term, sorry. Yeah, you're right.
You could at least have that first one. Okay. Because all the cities allow you to, if the host lives there, most cities allow you to do unlimited rentals. So
for the first one. And is that short term too?
That's short term. Okay. Most cities, if you live on site, you can do all you want. Because then that's a way for you to make income, and it makes those cities look bad if they're taking away from people who are making small income like that.
Perfect. Okay. So let's just say if we've got, somebody who's got their first property locked in, they're renting it out, they've figured out Airbnb, they got 2-3 rentals, rental bookings going and whatnot. Now they're comfortable to get the second property, right? What would you recommend they do for that, right? What would that look like? Where do they go to rent? Should they rent a condo? Should they rent a home? What do you recommend?
It's going to depend on where they are. Okay. But let's start with like how I did.
Metro areas, let's just say that.
Well, look, how I started, Miami. Okay. See, the first thing, you don't want to expand too far from where your first listing is because of housekeeping. Beautiful. In the beginning, you're probably going to be doing most of the cleaning yourself.
And how far are you talking about? Like
my second unit was right next door. Okay. So I rented the house.
The closer the better. That makes sense.
You're never gonna, maybe never gonna find that, but maybe you'll find something on the same block. But in this situation, I got lucky, and there was a nearly identical house. It was a little bit bigger than the one I rented first.
Perfect.
That had 3 units. It was a triplex. So now I have like a little 4-unit of rentals going in like this little compound. And that's what you do. And now you have your first one. You already have your system. You already know how long it takes to clean. Because cleaning is one of the things that's going to keep you from growing unless you start hiring people. So if you're doing your first unit, you're usually going to clean it yourself. Same thing with your second. Back then, me and my wife would clean the units. So
so tell us this right now, right? Given the fact that the second one is going to be a long-term rental unit, right?
Or short-term.
The second one, not the first one. The second one could be has to be long-term, right?
Well, it depends where you are. Like in Miami and a lot of areas, you could still do short term.
So it depends on the city.
It depends on the city.
Okay.
And what I would do if like your county doesn't allow it, then you have to go to the next county.
Got it. And are long-term rentals viable or not in Airbnb?
Well, I'll tell you, I have a couple buildings that they're not long-term. Those are called midterms.
Okay.
Is what they actually are. Where they're not weekenders. They're people or companies that are renting for 30 days, 60 days. And that has its own different rules, regulations, and challenges.
Beautiful. Here's the question I want to ask you, right? Very important. So let's just say I live in LA, and LA does not allow right now, from what I understand, I think at least the city of Santa Monica, I know that does not allow, or maybe it's LA that doesn't allow short-term rentals, right? So how would I check the viability of a long-term rental? Like what would I do to figure out like, hey, is this something that's worth doing? Like what would that research look like?
One of the major things that I get in places that use this model where you have to go 30 days or more.
Yeah.
Areas that there's a lot of construction.
Okay.
Because these companies, construction companies, or places where there's a lot of construction, there's a whole bunch of people relocating to those areas. So you're going to see people that need a place for 90 days while they close on their new house because they just got a new job, or the companies that are coming to build infrastructure. There'll be guys that are going to stay 3 and 6 months. So areas where there's construction, a lot of construction, that's an ideal area for midterm rentals.
Got it.
I have a property right now in West Palm, a new building where I haven't done, and there's no rule against short term. The building allows it and the city allows it. But I've had a flush of a whole bunch of 30 to 60-day rentals since I got those properties. So I've only done a handful of short terms because everybody, like I just have, I'll tell you, the spring training for baseball is right up the street. So I just got a guy who's coming from for spring training for the minors. He's going into the majors, and he needs a place for 60 days.
Gotcha.
Dude, that's a quickie. That's a quick 10 grand you just made. There's no commissions. You get the money. There's no Airbnb platform. And those guys like that, they know this is kind of maybe could be on the fringe of stuff that Airbnb doesn't want you to do. So a lot of these people, they know that they'll save some money if they go outside platform, and there's risks by doing this. So you have to be comfortable. But a guy like that, he's been traveling and he knows. So he's like, his first message was, "Hey, I know that there's a way to save some money. Could we talk outside of platform?" And I did when I figured out a way to send them my number because the site will block you from doing it, but there's ways. And then we get in touch. I realize he's a real guy. He gives me his name because I gotten bit before with a squatter once in 10 years isn't bad, but and those guys were professionals. But this guy, he's a baseball player. I could look him up and see he's a baseball player. The moment I told him the price, they wired me the money. There was no hesitation. So that's a perfect customer. I know where he was coming there. Spring training is just a few blocks away. So those are niche little markets that you gotta understand. And you're like a micro market where you could make money from just being around an area, and you don't really have to worry about platforms.
Gotcha. What is let's just say so you get your first, you get your second. Second's making money. If it's making enough money, then you figure out your third, and then you figure out like how you could get some help in cleaning and other things. Is that kind of like how it goes? Okay.
Ali, you're pretty smart on this because there's a point you can't do the cleaning yourself.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And you won't be able to expand. So usually about 4 units.
Dude, I got to ask you, like, how bad was the cleaning experience for you, right? Like, what kind of mess did people leave?
Big messes. Big messes, but very seldom. I'll tell you a funny story in the beginning. So another thing that we started doing, we didn't talk about this, was how do we raise more money when you don't have any more money? Yeah. So, and you've already exhausted what you could get, but you have this real estate, right? So we started thinking about a secondary arbitrage, which was, all right, I live in this nice house, right? And it's furnished nicely. What if I not only rent the guest house, but rent the house I'm living in? And, you got to be adventurous. And we were kind of desperate. So we've noticed that there was a lot of events where we lived because we lived in the design district in Miami. A lot of events every weekend, a different concert or something. So that means that you were renting the house you were living in, which you had rented yourself. Yeah. So what we would do is we had the house set up where if we got a booking, we prepped it. We had an owner's closet where any valuables, and the house was a 4-bedroom, so we would advertise it as a 3-bedroom, and we'll lock off that bedroom with anything that we didn't want anybody to touch or use.
Got it.
And the arbitrage was that there's a whole bunch of cities back then, and still now, all over the coast in Florida where you could get a rental for a lot less. So I would rent my place sometimes for $1,000 a night for that weekend. And I could stay in a nice little beach town in Central Florida for $80 or $120 for those nights. So I could make a $3,000 reservation and then I have a place to hang out on the beach for $300-400. And now I just made $2,600.
Gotcha. Wow.
So that's me and a lot of my friends. We did that because we realized that we already had that space. So we were monetizing space we already have so we could get more space.
Got it.
The only time that kind of bit me was so from the first house, we actually ended up, because the house next door, the main house was a little bit bigger. So we moved to that house and kept renting the other one. And we would still like do that same rental thing. And we had just rented the place. I think it was Friday, Saturday, nice booking. We were staying in a place in Brickell. It was cheap for some reason. And I get a crazy reservation for that Sunday to like Tuesday. It was like 50. I didn't want to rent it, so I had the price set at $1,500 a night because we wanted to go back home. And I told my wife, "Look at this, almost $5,000." And the name was Royal Highness. It was a stolen credit card at the end, but they ended up trashing the house.
Wow.
So when we're talking about cleaning, that was like a major cleaning. They came in, and Airbnb ended up paying us a pretty substantial cleaning. So it was the first time I ever had to use the Airbnb host guarantee.
Gotcha.
So, because they'll cover you up to $1 million, but what does that entail? How do you do those claims? And I remember I'm like, well, what do I do? And I think I called ServPro.
Okay.
And ServPro came out, and like the estimate they gave me for cleaning was unreasonable. I never thought Airbnb would pay that, but they did. They gave me an estimate to clean the house for $30,000.
What? Oh my God. Jeez. Okay.
Insanity.
So the good thing is with Airbnb, like they'll reimburse you if you put a claim in.
Yeah, I sent them. Okay. They didn't necessarily say I had to use ServPro, but they needed an invoice showing what it would cost.
Got it. So that's something really interesting. I had no idea, because I was like, yeah, what if they trash the house, and what does this look like? Do I gotta foot the bill and so forth, and what are the processes? So from what I'm hearing is all it takes is you to get an invoice from a cleaning service and send that to Airbnb, and they'll process it. So that makes sense. So they're pretty much in integrity with reimbursing people. Beautiful.
I was concerned, and that one I was concerned, and because of the claim size, because there was a few stolen items and things like that. It wound up being over 40 grand.
Wow.
So they ended up. I was like, well, they said we're gonna send an adjuster over. And when the adjuster came, he's like, "Oh, the claim's already paid. We're just comparing the square footage."
Gotcha.
And I'm like, "Oh, so that's it."
So let me ask you this, right? And if you were like, how would you go about coaching people, right? So somebody's bought a house, now they've bought a second house. Now it's time to buy them third and fourth, right? How does somebody accelerate their Airbnb portfolio, right? I know that there are times that you rented multiple properties at one time from, tell this example to friends of mine that, Laz went in to this huge apartment complex and did 15 commercial leases on 50. Oh, wow.
51 apartments.
Well, yeah, you leased 51 apartments at the same time from the apartment complex. And so how does one, first of all, get that done right? And then secondly, what's the process of, like, what you're basically talking about? You're doing 50, you're scaling on a very big level, right? So what needs to be in place to be able to do all of that?
Credit-wise, you need money.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Credit-wise, capital-wise, and then what are the logistics?
Okay. So credit, believe it or not, they didn't check my credit to do that deal.
Okay.
They never do. So a deal of that scale, credit's not
what did they check?
Factor.
Right. How are they making their decision?
Trust. One of the things that they wanted to do is see what we already had. So we did it before we met the developer and owner. His right-hand guy, he went and toured some of our places, see how we were running our business.
Okay, gotcha.
So credit really wasn't a determining factor, because we're talking about a rent roll of $200,000 a month.
So they're looking at business viability of what you've already done. It's almost like, okay, that makes sense, right? Perfect.
But most people aren't going to do a 50-unit deal, but maybe you're going to do 5 units or something.
Okay,
and
let's go. Better example.
When we did that deal, our intentions wasn't to do 50 units, but it was 50 or nothing. So it really stretched us financially
Okay.
and put us at risk. And
So 5 units, bro. Let's talk about that, right? Like that's okay. Let's go. We got 5 unit people probably hearing this
there's
right
a lot
now.
of 5 unit people. So
Okay.
first, you find a building
Got it.
that this to work usually is buildings that are just built. So let's say a developer just built a building, and
Got
for
it.
whatever reason, they're not leasing up quickly enough.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what a lease up is, but what that means is all these buildings, the guy doesn't shell out $100 million to build a
Got
building. He gets a loan, and the loans, the way they work, they give them different draws.
Got it.
They get a draw when the building gets built, and then once they do their lease up, the bank is willing to give them more money for the next project because now that project is now generating income.
Okay.
So for the developers, let's say you're not leasing up quickly enough, and you know that your sell through rate or lease through rate is going to take you 24 months to fill the whole community.
Yeah.
Now you're losing a whole bunch of opportunity costs by doing that. Now, see a guy comes in and says he wants to lease 10 apartments of your 70 unit complex or something. Now he accelerated your lease up substantially because maybe you're leasing only like 4 apartments a month or something. And this guy just gave you 4 months worth of rentals in 1 second. Now that's the win-win. So you have to find a place that's in a location that you could serve rentals like this. Newer buildings in good neighborhoods that have parking and have amenities are the best ones for this type of things for.
Understand.
Because there you're not only going to get a vacationer, but you're going to get people that are probably going to want to stay a little longer. And it's more like a house, and they're going to be there 30 days. And those are ideal situations if you could get them. So I've gotten many deals. Like that 50-unit deal, the way I got it, we were just driving around. Actually, no, we were eating tacos.
So I know you're not recommending people eat tacos and drive around.
No.
Let me ask you. Here's a question, right? Like I'm going to be a cynic right now, right? It's like, what would make a good Airbnb deal versus not, right? So from what I'm hearing from you so far, short-term rentals, counties that have short-term rentals, that's always a preference, right?
Where the restrictions aren't going to. If you have a place that tells you can only rent 6 months out of the year,
right?
Unless you're very creative,
right? Okay,
you're putting yourself in a bad situation.
Beautiful.
But if there's no restrictions and you're not in a place that the neighbors are going to hate you, because that's the other thing. If you're in a neighborhood that's it, the developer says, yeah, we want to do it, but then there's a whole bunch of little mansions and things around you, and people that are going to be like, well, that's not the type of people who live in this neighborhood. And then they're going to, those type of people will call Airbnb, and it could become a problem. So you have to be wise about your selection. And the other thing is the money's actually made when you negotiate the lease on the front end.
Okay.
You can't be desperate to get more units and overpay for units.
Beautiful. So what you're saying is that if you rent 5 at a time, you have more negotiating power.
You should get some kind of concessions.
Beautiful.
And that big deal, I got a month and a half free, and we call that we call it a build out. In a lot of these deals, in commercial real estate, there's a lot of build outs that get done when you're. When you do a commercial space, they give you a vanilla shell, and then they give you a period for you to build your store or whatever you're going to do.
Beautiful.
Same thing here. You got to furnish the place. You got to take pictures. You got to do all that stuff.
Gotcha.
Where we've gotten really wise, and in that particular deal, what needed to happen is we had to get really quick at furnishing, because like the holding costs are adding up. So
that makes sense, right? You're furnishing 50 apartments.
So we did it in under 4 weeks.
Got it. So the way this would go out for somebody who's just starting out, they get their first property, which is their live-in, their second property. Then they could potentially, if they feel really adventurous, they could, rent more. And finally, once they get the hang of it, they could, rent 5 or 6 at the same time if they have the money to furnish those, pay the deposit down.
And talk to landlords and make sure, like right now in this market, if you're not getting at least a month free, I wouldn't do the deal.
Okay, gotcha.
Give you a little buffer, build up your pipeline of reservations.
Okay.
if you're getting a month free, it sets you up for success.
Yeah, got it. So we talked about like number one, just to rehash, right? We talked about just a few things. Number one, first property, second property, how to basically negotiate if you're leasing multiple properties from the same landlord. Um, and tell me like, this is on the asset acquisition side and the setup side, right? Tell me about the technical for Airbnb, right? What makes something appetizing on Airbnb? Like, how do I like book up my reservations? Staging, pictures, like what's been the code to crack there so that my property on Airbnb gets noticed more than the guy next door who's trying to rent out too?
Yeah, especially today, you have to be creative because there was a point where competition on that was easy because if you just had good pictures
Yeah.
versus a guy that didn't have the best pictures,
Yeah.
you'll rent. But it's going to go into amenities. So I would look at a building that has a pool,
Okay.
has a gym,
Got
you
it.
know, has parking.
All right.
Don't do deals in places that don't have parking because you could also charge people for parking.
Yeah.
So it's another revenue stream. And the more things you could check off when you're putting up your listing makes your field smaller and smaller. So if you're, let's say you have a big bedroom, maybe put 2 beds in there because now you're sleeping more people.
Oh, yeah.
And definitely always put a king bed. And if you can fit 2 king beds in a bedroom,
Okay.
you're twice as good.
Oh.
You
Dude,
know,
that's brilliant because I never thought of that, right? You're basically saying that, hey, just like hotels do it, put 2 queen beds in there, perhaps, right, to fit something in.
occupancy again. That occupancy thing is another thing you got to think about because some places won't allow you to bump occupancy up that much.
Understood. And I think one of the other things that I rented out this Airbnb with some friends of mine in Joshua Tree, and they had like, they said that they had like a pool and a jacuzzi, right? Like a cold pool and a jacuzzi, and the pool was like this freaking. I mean, like it was 5 feet long.
That's a splash pool.
But, yeah, exactly, right. But they could check out that there's a pool there, right? And I think like what other things that you could Airbnb ask for, like a pool table or like what other amenities?
There's a lot of things you could put on there. A pool table is cool. Definitely pool and jacuzzi is good. So a lot of those amenities like that, if you're in the right building, you're getting that all for free. Because the building has all that stuff already. And you can check off all those boxes could be checked off. The area is also important. Are you walkable to anything that's cool, like an arena or you're close to the beach or close to a lake or there's so many different things that make your listing unique. And Airbnb's kind of updated their search criteria, and if you have that unique stuff, then you get put in all these different categories.
And that's like on an average Airbnb, say that rents out for, I don't know, something that I could rent for $3,000, 2-bedroom in a metro area, right? What could I expect cash flow wise, rent minus expenses and what have you?
So right now, what I'm seeing, I'll give you an example on 1-bedrooms that are a good deal on a lot of my 1-bedrooms that I'm getting for about $2,100. A lot of those properties are producing over $5,000 in revenue.
Wow. So, you're talking net?
That's before rent. So revenue meaning $5,000. You're making $5,000, and you got $2,000 in rent. That leaves you $3,000, and then you got maybe a few hundred in other expenses.
Okay.
But let's say you had 10 in that particular building, you just put $25,000 in your pocket.
Wow. Got it. So, decent. So thank you for that, brother. Just going forward, right? Like to, put a bow tie on this. A lot of people, like I've spoken to you a lot, like offline, about, the psychology and the mindset behind entrepreneurship, and like and I remember you telling me, man, like it's coming. And I remember having this conversation with you, I think around COVID time. And I remember you saying, man, like, it's just like, I'm just in flow, right? It's just coming together. Right. And, most people are not there yet. They're basically trying to figure out, well, I'm going to take this first really wobbly step right now. Right. So
Well,
what would
when
you
you
recommend for people like those, right? First steps to take, and so forth. Where do they start?
Well, that's why that ADU type setup is such a good step, because
Okay.
what most people need is a winning experience.
Okay.
When you get like one winning experience,
Yeah.
then you're comfortable and you could like
Yeah.
dip your foot in the pool a little bit and say, well, that wasn't too bad. I could actually rent one now
Gotcha.
and not be scared. And you already gave yourself a little bit of experience.
Got it.
So a winning experience is always the key, especially with people that aren't as there's people like me. I'm a risk taker,
Yeah.
and sometimes it bites me in the ass, and I and I pay the piper. But sometimes, most of the times, it doesn't. Uh, so it's just what your risk tolerance is on a lot of this type of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of safe opportunities when you're doing this. Where like living for free is great. Like, look, the house that I'm in now.
Yeah.
I'm not living for free, but guess what? I like everywhere else.
Yeah.
As soon as I was able to, I have a detached garage in this.
Okay. Got it.
And I created an ADU out there. I'm renting it for $3
And
million.
that's pretty safe, right? That's really safe, right? Because that's like the perfect step, actually.
Yeah.
Right? Because you really can't lose because you're already in the property, so you're not going to lose that much anyways. Even if
You're already there.
you're already there, right? And you can keep an eye out on things, and you have many other options as such.
Plus, the other thing is you get used to dealing with clients
Yeah.
and expectations, and you understand. And what happens as you get bigger,
Yeah.
it's harder to manage some of those expectations. But if you're the guy that's there and the customer sees you, so you see a lot of these smaller hosts, they're all super hosts.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to give somebody a bad review if the guy was there and he gave you a beer and talked to you for 2 hours. Even if you found like a roach or something, you probably still give that guy a 5-star because he's your friend. But, so that's a good place to start, because you also don't get so jaded with like a huge portfolio of customers just like blasting you with different questions and concerns. Like a guy that's there, they're gonna ask, oh, maybe some towels, and you're the guy who just brings them some towels, and they're happy. So it's a good start to have a winning experience.
Gotcha, man. Brother, on that note, man, thank you for that. I wanted to ask you where people can go to get support from you. I know that you offer some courses as well, so on Airbnb specifically, and mentorship, and what does that look like? So, so those of us that are curious about learning and getting in the market, I know Laz is the guy and he's got some resources. So where do people go?
Best place to go is going to be Instagram. Go to my Instagram at Brickle Cigars and send me a DM. Me or someone from my team will get back to you, and we could go over mentoring options.
And could you spell that out? Could you spell the hashtag out?
Sure. It's BRICKELL Cigars, CIGARS. And I kept the name because it's part of the whole story, how the whole business started. It's from having the Brickle Cigar Company and how it bankrupted me and then still brought me here.
So thank you, man. Thank you for being here with me and sharing your wisdom and this amazing story of, courage and, making stuff happen really quickly and doing it in a good way. So thank you, everybody, for being on this podcast, for listening to this podcast. If you're interested in restoring your credit, reach out to imaxcredit.com. There'll be more content to follow. Take care.